Leading up to his 2013 arrest, Welshman Craig Thomas had subjected his partner Charlotte Rooks to a campaign of torment that eventually led to media outlets labeling him the worst ever abuser in British history. Rooks spoke of countless incidents of deranged violence that included Thomas hitting her in the head with hammers, stabbing her in the back, or making her sleep naked standing up. He would place Rooks into what she described as the crucifixion pose as he beat and forced himself on her for days on end. Rooks twice tried to escape him but returned after Thomas threatened to kill her family. At one point, he took her by force from a hospital where she was getting treatment for her injuries and threatened to abuse and kill her dying grandmother, who was at the same medical facility. South Wales police issued a sincere apology to the woman after a 2018 report from the Independent Police Complaints Commission found multiple failings by South Wales officers of rescuing Rooks from her abuser. The police made multiple visits to the couple's home, but had failed to grasp the severity of the situation. In one incident, when Rooks was pregnant, Thomas hit her in the stomach with the metal pipe extension of a vacuum cleaner, threatening to beat the baby out. A member of the public saw the assault through the window of their Cardiff apartment and alerted law enforcement. 4 officers arrived at the home but believed Thomas when he said the call was fake, failing to identify recent injuries to Rooks' face as a sign of abuse. Once the police were gone, Thomas took out his frustration over the call on his partner. He trapped her arms under a sofa and relentlessly stomped on her stomach. At one point, he made her choose how she wanted to die, whether by drinking bleach or having a bag placed over her head. Thomas was eventually arrested and sentenced to 10 years in prison at Cardiff Crown Court. When Rooks made her story public, she said that Thomas had nearly killed her, adding, "My injuries are life-changing. I have a bulging blood vessel in my brain. Even now that could rupture and kill me." The woman also publicly voiced her concerns in July of 2023 when Thomas was released upon completing his sentence. After nearly a decade, Rooks still feared that he would find her and kill her. Number 7. Mary Beth FINKEY. The authorities in Peoria, Arizona, were called to a home near North El Mirage Road in April of 2023. The caller was an elderly man whose identity wasn't revealed and who told the police that he'd been severely beaten by his wife and primary caregiver, 71-year-old Mary Beth FINKEY. The man had to use a walker and a wheelchair due to various medical conditions that rendered him partially disabled. The incident had begun after a heavily intoxicated FINKEY had collapsed near the front door of their home. The woman's spouse tried to help her to her feet, at which point FINKEY started yelling that she was tired of taking care of him. When the man returned to his chair in the living room, FINKEY charged him with a 5-pound, 3-foot-long barbell and started striking him in the head and face. The disabled man sustained several hits before he was able to get away and call 911. FINKEY fled upon hearing him make the call but was located shortly by responding officers. Court documents indicated that the woman was arrested on suspicion of abusing a vulnerable adult, aggravated assault, and aggravated assault with a deadly instrument. Number 6. Richard David Schlosser. In early January of 2018, Richard David Schlosser launched a vicious attack on his newlywed wife at their home in Newport Beach, California. Over the course of several hours from January the 5th to the 6th, 36-year-old Schlosser tormented the victim, who was only identified as being 65 years old. The man punched and kicked her, hit her with a candelabrum, and cut her with scissors. Schlosser, who was at the time under the influence of drugs and alcohol, held his wife captive for at least 6 hours, during which he was reported to have waterboarded, choked her, and shoved a towel down her throat. When Schlosser began to sober up, the victim was able to call a friend who alerted law enforcement. Schlosser was arrested on charges of torture, criminal threats, false imprisonment, and corporal injury of a spouse. His wife was taken to a local hospital where she started recovering. In the fall of 2018, Schlosser pleaded guilty to 6 felony charges in a deal that saw the torture charge dropped. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. At the time of the attack on his wife, he was out on $50,000 bail for a separate 2016 domestic violence case in Riverside County, in which he was accused of false imprisonment, inflicting corporal injury, assault with a deadly weapon, and criminal threats against a woman in her 20s. He pleaded not guilty in that case, and as of the latest updates, his trial on the matter was pending. Number 5. Peter LIZON. In July of 2012, Stephanie LIZON went into a section of Bosley Rental and Supply in Jackson County, West Virginia, while her husband Peter was in a different part of the store. Stephanie told a worker, "I'm trying to get away from my husband. I just need to hide for a few minutes." The staff member noted that the woman was limping from an unspecified injury. She was gaunt, and although her clothing was clean, she smelled badly. Stephanie refused to have the authorities called but accepted help towards reaching a domestic violence shelter. Officials at the shelter described the woman as filthy and emaciated. Her feet were mutilated and swollen. She had a mark in the shape of a clothes iron on her breast, and her back was covered in scars and burns. Stephanie told officials that for nearly a decade, since the couple had moved from Maryland to West Virginia, her husband had treated her like a slave. Some aspects of her torment reportedly involved being made to kneel before Peter whenever he entered a room and being shackled to a bed. She'd reportedly given birth to a stillborn baby while in shackles, which her husband then buried on their farm. Stephanie's injuries were documented at the shelter and produced at least 45 photos depicting gruesome abuse. The authorities conducted a search of the LIZON's Leroy farm and arrested Peter on July the 5th of 2012. Although prosecutors argued that it was evident the scars had been inflicted via abuse, the domestic violence charges against Peter were dropped in 2013, partially due to the fact that Stephanie had refused to cooperate with the authorities and denied the allegations. Stephanie claimed that the injuries to her feet had occurred following a farming accident and explained the burns as accidental contact with her husband while he was holding a frying pan. Updates indicated that the couple's relationship had ended and Peter subsequently remarried. In March of 2020, he was arrested for kidnapping and malicious wounding following an incident with his wife whose identity wasn't revealed. The victim seemed to have undergone a similarly horrific treatment to that suffered by Stephanie. Following a dispute in early February of 2020, she tried to jump out of Peter's car, but he caught her by the coat and dragged her down the road as she was hanging out the passenger door. Upon examining the victim's road rash injuries, the authorities discovered several others that seemed to have occurred recently. The woman claimed that weeks prior, Peter had tied her to a chair for 2 days and whipped her with belts. She was also repeatedly punched in the torso and not allowed to eat, drink, or go to the bathroom during that time. Other instances of abuse perpetrated by Peter involved punishing the woman by forcing her to kneel in the corner, pinching her fingers with pliers, or choking her to the verge of unconsciousness with a pillowcase. The 45-year-old reportedly threatened to kill her entire family if she left him. The authorities were baffled by the abuse, and referring to the victim, Chief Deputy Ross Mellinger told a media outlet, "The mind can't wrap itself around the barbaric nature of what she went through." Number 4. Glenys Downey. Leading up to September of 2021, Englishwoman Glenys Downey, aged 65, had tormented her husband for years in what a judge would later describe as a relationship of utter domination. Their marriage had been deteriorating for some time before Downey ramped up her abuse in 2019. That year, she forbade her husband, who was in his mid-60s, from seeing friends or family. The abuse continued until the man reported her to the police in 2021, and Downey was arrested and charged with controlling and coercive behavior. During the trial that followed, the extent of Downey's horrific behavior towards her spouse was revealed. The couple lived in Swanwick, Hampshire, and Downey constantly humiliated her husband and degraded him, particularly over his cleanliness. The man reported that he lived in constant fear of Downey's violent outbursts that typically involved her punching and kicking him. Her behavior was deemed to have had elements of school-ground bullying, as she would pull her husband's hair or poke him with knives. The woman then taunted him for being fearful of her and refusing to fight back, which she cited as evidence of his unworthiness, calling him half a man. The couple's daughters both testified against Downey during her trial. She was found guilty by a jury at Portsmouth Crown Court in the fall of 2022 and jailed for 2 years, in addition to being handed an indefinite restraining order. Number 3. Husband of BIBI AISHA. Born Aisha Mohammadzi, Bibi Aisha was featured on the cover of Time magazine in August of 2010 with the horrific injuries she'd suffered while trying to escape an arranged marriage in her native Afghanistan. The woman had been mutilated by her husband, who cut off her nose and ears. The caption accompanying the photo was, "What happens if we leave Afghanistan?" The cover generated immense international controversy, sparking debates about the consequences of the Afghan war. When she was in her early teens, Aisha was married off to a Taliban fighter by her family as payment for a debt. She was relentlessly abused by her husband and his family, who reportedly forced her to sleep in the stable with the animals. When she was 18 years old, Aisha attempted to flee. She was caught by local police and imprisoned for several months, after which she was released to her father, who in turn took her back to her husband. As punishment for her escape attempt, the man and several accomplices took Aisha to the mountains. As the others held the teen down, her husband severed her nose and ears before leaving her for dead. Aisha mustered enough strength to crawl to her grandfather's house, and her relatives took her to a US military base, from which she ultimately reached the US. She arrived in California in 2010 and was set to receive free reconstructive surgery, but the torment that she'd suffered had wrought havoc on her mental health. The trauma had left her with seizures, panic attacks, and borderline personality disorder. Once her condition was stabilized through therapy and medication, preparations began in 2012 to rebuild her face. Doctors placed a silicone shell under her forehead that expanded the tissue they'd use in the reconstruction of her nose, along with tissue and cartilage from her forearm and hand. Aisha was adopted by an Afghan-American couple, moved to Maryland, and began studying to become a police officer. In late June of 2023, she was featured on the cover of Ariana magazine, and the photo displayed the changes to her face that had occurred following 12 completed surgeries. The woman was described on the cover as the symbol of hope, strength, and courage. Number 2. Aaron Uchitel. In late June of 2016, Fawn Ortega went to check on her daughter Prosper at the latter's home in Atlanta, Georgia, after suspecting that her husband was isolating her. Upon reaching the residence, Fawn was met by the husband, Aaron Uchitel, who denied her entry. Fawn was able to fight her way inside, found Prosper, and saw that her face was swollen beyond recognition. The woman called the police, who arrived at the scene and arrested Aaron. It would emerge that for several days the man had tortured, assaulted, and abused his wife, who'd recently given birth. Aaron had reportedly told her, "I'm going to make it so where nobody will ever want you again." As he beat her relentlessly and cut up her hair, he repeatedly punched Prosper in the area of her eyes, breaking her orbital bones so that she wouldn't be able to see her baby boy, Ari, who was less than 2 weeks old. Aaron also poured scalding water into the 23-year-old mother's ears so that she couldn't hear her child's cries. At one point during the onslaught, Prosper had tried to escape through a bedroom window, but Aaron pulled her back and continued assaulting her throughout the beating that nearly ended her life. Aaron also repeatedly forced himself on his wife. In the aftermath of Aaron's arrest, Prosper began recovering in a local hospital. In early July, she partially regained her vision and was able to see her son again, a moment which was captured by her family members in a clip later picked up by news outlets. In just 2 days, a GoFundMe raised $94,000 of the $100,000 goal that would go towards the medical procedures as well as the physical and mental therapy Prosper would have to undergo. After number 1, we have our release on When Intruders Go Wrong, lined up for those who can't get enough of our content. Stay tuned if you'd like. Number 1. Philip Edward Bowers. On November the 20th of 2020, Texas man Philip Edward Bowers was sentenced to 30 years in prison after he pleaded guilty to beating and torturing his wife. The incident was traced back to the spring of 2019, when Montgomery County Hospital District services were called to a home in New Caney. Responding units found Bowers' wife alone in a back bedroom, clinging to life after she'd been assaulted for days. Neighbors told the police that they'd seen Bowers and the couple's 3 children leaving the residence shortly before the arrival of paramedics. The unnamed victim recovered following life-saving treatment and reconstructive surgeries, and she was released into the care of family members after 2 weeks. One of the detectives working the case described the incident as absolutely the worst assault he'd ever investigated. Prosecutor Echo Hudson claimed that murder victims had fewer injuries on them than the woman, noting, "The things that happened in that house are the things of which horror movies are made." For a period of 3 days while their children were present in the house, Bowers tortured his wife, inflicting devastating damage. In his campaign of violence, he used items that included steel-toed boots, a large flashlight, a box cutter, and a vinyl jump rope. Shortly after the attack, Bowers was tracked down and arrested at a convenience store. He was given his decades-long sentence after admitting one charge of aggravated assault causing serious bodily injury with a deadly weapon, one charge of family violence, and one charge of aggravated kidnapping. Number 8. Henry Vincent. 37-year-old Englishman Henry Vincent had been linked to multiple burglaries already when on April 4th, 2018, he decided to strike again. He, along with an accomplice, broke into the home of an elderly pensioner in Hither Green, London, belonging to 78-year-old Richard Osborne Brooks and his 76-year-old wife, Maureen. Osborne Brooks told authorities that he heard a knock at the door late at night. When he answered the door, the two men grabbed him and shoved him into his home. They demanded money, and Vincent used a screwdriver as a weapon to intimidate Osborne Brooks. But Osborne Brooks didn't back down. In an attempt to protect himself and his wife, he grabbed a 12-inch kitchen knife and told Vincent to leave, warning him that they would be sorry if they didn't. When Vincent's accomplice saw the large knife, he fled the scene and encouraged Vincent to do so as well. Instead of following his accomplice's lead, Vincent lunged towards Osborne Brooks with the intention of stabbing him first with the screwdriver, but Osborne Brooks's knife made contact first. Vincent finally fled the home following the stabbing, but collapsed nearby. Police found him and transported him to a nearby hospital, where he succumbed to his wounds and was pronounced dead. Osborne Brooks was arrested on suspicion of murder, but was released without charge shortly after. Number 7. Christopher Hoops. The belief that someone is intruding your home, whether or not it's true, is sometimes enough for tragedy to strike. The case of 36-year-old Christopher Hoops and his 25-year-old wife, Colleen Hoops, is a tragic example of this. In the middle of the night on May the 20th, 2022, Christopher Hoops woke up in their Tempe, Arizona home and was startled by a figure in his bedroom. He reached for his gun and fired 3 shots, 2 of which struck the figure. Upon realizing that it was his wife, Colleen, Christopher called 911 for help. Officers arrived at the home at 3:45 a.m. and Colleen was rushed to the hospital in an effort to tend to 2 gunshot wounds in her chest. Unfortunately, she was pronounced dead just a short time later at 4:10 a.m. Christopher was charged with second-degree murder and the unlawful discharge of a weapon. He was taken to jail and booked on a $750,000 bond, which he posted on May the 22nd, 2022. His trial is expected to take place in October of 2022. If found guilty, he will be sentenced to a maximum of 25 years in prison. Number 6. Virginia Morrison. Virginia Morrison, a 69-year-old grandmother from Florida, was enjoying her Sunday afternoon at home on May the 22nd, 2022. That is, until she realized that an unidentified man had entered her home and was standing in her living room. She described the man's face as a total blank, and despite her asking him who he was and why he was in her home, he said nothing. She called to her husband in the other room, 80-year-old Charlie Morrison, to get his gun in hopes of scaring off the intruder. When the sight of the gun didn't make the intruder budge, they called 911. Morrison quickly grabbed her own gun while on the phone, and Charlie fired a warning shot into the ground beside the intruder. That made the intruder leave the living room and go outside, but he remained on their property, maintaining a blank stare and never saying a word. Virginia followed him outside and fired her own warning shot above the intruder, warning him that she would shoot him if he didn't leave. That's when the intruder started coming towards her, and in an act of self-defense, she shot him. Police arrived at the scene and took the man to the hospital, where he was ultimately pronounced dead. He was later identified as 38-year-old Ezequiel Rosario Torres. At this time, no charges have been filed against Morrison, but the case has been forwarded to the state attorney's office to decide whether or not she should face charges.
He stepped in, and I just turned around and I said, "Who are you? What do you want?" Nothing. This guy never said a word the whole time he was here. I fired a warning shot, told him to back off. He just kept coming. And I didn't realize I'd hit him, but once I looked, he had a hole right here in his t-shirt, and I thought, I got him.
Number 5. Anthony Gray. On April the 18th of 2022, 52-year-old Anthony Gray trespassed onto Stagg High School in Stockton, California. He drove his car into one of the school's parking lots, parked, and walked right onto campus. A high schooler named AISHA Renyagha was in the parking lot at the time, and when Gray saw her, he targeted her out of the blue, stabbing her several times. Witnesses and school security called 911, and when police arrived shortly after, Gray was immediately arrested. The high schooler was rushed to the hospital, but sadly, she was unable to recover from her wounds and died the same day. Police determined the stabbing to be a random act of violence and have been unable to identify a motive for Gray's actions. At a hearing on May the 16th, 2022, Gray suddenly called out to the judge saying that he wanted to plead guilty to the crime. His lawyer disagreed with his plea and expressed to the judge that Gray had a history of mental illness and should be interviewed by a doctor to determine if he is fit to stand trial. The judge granted this request, but on June the 13th, the court-appointed doctor concluded that Gray was in fact competent to stand trial. Gray was charged with murder, injuring a child, and possessing a weapon on school grounds, and is awaiting trial behind bars without bail. A date for the trial has yet to be set. Number 4. Travis and Jamie Lynn Jewton. At 3 a.m. on August the 13th, 2021, married couple Travis and Jamie Lynn Jewton were asleep in their home in Marion County, Oregon. They were set to travel to Hawaii the next day and had a friend who would be looking after their home and cat sleeping in their guest bedroom. An intruder, unidentifiable due to the mask they were wearing, broke into the home and attacked the married couple with a knife while they slept in their bed. 24-year-old Jamie Lynn suffered 19 stab wounds, and in trying to protect his wife, 26-year-old Travis suffered several stab wounds of his own. The friend sleeping in the next room woke up and called the police when they heard what was going on. Shortly after the attack, the intruder disappeared. When police arrived on the scene, they found that Travis had passed away in his heroic attempt to save Jamie Lynn from the attacker. Jamie Lynn was still alive and was rushed to the hospital to have her injuries treated, from which she eventually made a full recovery. Nearly a year later, police have been unable to identify the suspect or a motive for the attack. In June of 2022, Travis's family announced a $50,000 reward to anyone with information that will help them solve the case. Number 3. Louis Sacco. On November the 16th, 2020, 23-year-old Celeste Mano, a call center worker from Melbourne, Australia, was stabbed to death by 35-year-old Louis Sacco, a former colleague. The killing took place at 4:10 in the morning after Sacco had broken into her room through her window while she was asleep. It was revealed that Sacco had been stalking his victim for months leading up to the murder. Shortly after the fatal attack, Sacco turned himself into the police. In the immediate aftermath, police received a tip that Sacco, on his way to the police station, had dumped a cell phone near the home. It turned out to be Mano's cell phone. The police had a sneaking suspicion housed important information related to the killing. The cell phone was retrieved and was indeed found to have compelling evidence to aid in the prosecution of Sacco. Despite having turned himself in shortly after the killing, Sacco pleaded not guilty in court under the advice of his lawyer, who was attempting to help him avoid a jail sentence by obtaining a forensic psychiatric assessment stating that he was mentally ill. At a hearing in March of 2022, an official psychiatric assessment declared Sacco mentally unfit to currently stand trial and will likely remain unfit to do so for at least a year. An update on the case is not expected until the spring of 2023. Number 2. Justin William Wright. Just before 9 a.m. on the morning of June the 21st, 2022, a 26-year-old man by the name of Justin William Wright broke into his next-door neighbor's home in Clearwater, Florida. The neighbor, a woman whose identity has remained private for her protection, woke up to find Wright standing in her bedroom. He began to attack her, and as she fought to defend herself, she managed to call the police. Even the police being on the phone didn't faze Wright, and he continued to attack her. That's when she reached for her gun and shot Wright once, which was enough to put an end to the assault. Police arrived and found Wright dead at the scene. Upon examination of the woman, she had injuries that aligned with the assault she reported, and police determined that the weapon she fired was legally registered to her. The investigation is ongoing, but police haven't found any information suggesting that the shooting was anything other than self-defense, nor have they been able to determine Wright's motive for breaking in. Number 1. Joe Horn. On November the 14th, 2007, Joe Horn, a 61-year-old resident of a wealthy Pasadena, Texas neighborhood, witnessed 2 unidentified men burglarizing his neighbor's home in broad daylight. Horn called 911 to report the incident, and while on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, Horn revealed that he owned a shotgun and asked if the dispatcher would like him to stop the intruders. Despite the dispatcher telling him not to and to stay inside his own home, Horn became increasingly agitated with the situation, saying that he couldn't let them get away with it. Eventually, Horn couldn't contain himself anymore, and he ran outside with his gun to confront the 2 intruders, who were fleeing with a bag full of money and jewelry, telling them not to move. When the intruders tried to run off anyway, Horn fatally shot them in the back. The case went to trial, during which a grand jury decided that Horn's actions were justified, and he was found not guilty. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be hunted by Jason Voorhees for a week or only listen to Jason Derulo for a month? Let us know in the comments section below.